Elsa's amazing at these presentations. So Elsa was our very first purpose session. So we've been running our purpose sessions now for a few years. I'm Emma Egan, and I run Sterling HR alongside Bianca Clifton. And we specialize in human resources positions, and have had the privilege of knowing Elsa for a few years now. Sterling Group also recruits across the IT sectors, engineering and sales. And we have consultants working in Western Australia, here on the East Coast, and we've got Joseph, our CEO, in New Zealand. Elsa is a committed L&D, OD, and cultural transformation coach. So she facilitates embedding of strategic initiatives and strategies across all levels of the organisation. So she has about 30 years of coaching experience in financial services and IT sectors, and she brings a dynamic, people-centric focus to her coaching. So Elsa is a lifelong learner with an academic foundation in sociology, and she draws on a robust and rigorous research from multiple disciplinary sources, including positive psychology, neuroscience, voice of the customer, data analytics, mindfulness, and organizational psychology, along with reputable coaching methodologies to deliver targeted solution-focused coaching and instructional training. So today, Elsa is going to be talking about unleashing your creativity. And because, like flying a kite or studying a new language, creativity is a learnable skill. Keep practicing. So go under the hood with our cultural transformation expert, Elsa. And I hope you go away with some key things today. And Elsa's really happy to hang around at the end to answer further questions. She loves talking about this. So we can turn your mic on and we can chat away, but it's up to you. So this morning, if you want to ask questions, you can use the chat box or you can use the Q&A box. We're here. Yeah, reach out to us however you like, or put your hand up.
And put your hand up too, yeah, because we will be asking you guys to participate, because it's always nice to actually get you active in these things rather than just being a sponge. Being a little bit more active will actually help you retain and take away a different experience from this kind of an event.
Yes. So over to you, Elsa.
All right. So thank you very much, Emma. I'm really excited to be here today. Creativity is something that I find really can make a positive difference in people's lives. And very much to Emma's point, it is something that is a skill. So we are going to talk about some of the things that you can do to actually improve that creativity. We're also going to look underneath the hood and understand how our brain works in terms of creativity. So we're going to look at some of the neuroscience behind this. And then we're going to share a couple of, I think, short, sharp opportunities to stretch your creativity while we're here today live. So thank you very much for coming, and I do look forward to getting through this session with you guys today. So let's get started. So when we think about baselining ourselves, and it's always good to know exactly where you are when you baseline yourself. So some of you might think, well, you know, I'm not at all creative, you know, and some of you might want to put your hand up and go, yeah, that's just not me. Some of you might go, well, I don't really know how to be creative. It's not something that I've really ever explored. Also, too, other people would have no experience with actually doing that. So, you know, I just kind of get through life and it's not really something that's on my plate, not how I define myself. And then finally, some of you might be going, you know, I used to be really creative, but have you noticed there's this thing called a pandemic going on right now, and I'm just simply overwhelmed. So what I want to say to those of you who are actually in that position and you find yourself somewhere on that is that I just want to answer with a resounding yet. You might not be feeling that creative or understanding that you're creative, but it's really only a matter of perspective and time, because as we've alluded to, creativity is a skill, and a skill can be learned, improved, and mastered. And the way that we know that creativity is a skill is that this has been confirmed by actual scientific research. Unlike intelligence, which is basically predetermined genetically, when we look at something like creativity, creativity can be fostered and expanded. It is, in fact, a skill, right? So it's not a matter of, oh, I'm not as smart as Mozart, or, oh, you know, I'm not as intelligent as Picasso. All of those things are completely irrelevant, and we have the science to back that up. You think about it, how many of you have pulled together a next day lunch or dinner from leftovers, right? You've looked in the cupboard, especially during the pandemic, and gone, I can make something up. And it turns out great, even taking a different way to work, or something like, solving a jigsaw puzzle with the kids, right? And how many of you have survived working from home during the pandemic when you've got kids or partners or housemates or dogs or cats and you're juggling, right? All of these examples are what we call small c creativity. So they are examples of you being creative. It's just not quite as, I guess, the same size or perception, because people question their own creativity because they haven't composed a symphony or written an amazing app or painted a masterpiece. But those big C creativity things are simply examples of creativity that are the small C's expanded. It's a matter of time. It's a matter of, it's a function more of time and focus and lots of practice. So craftsmanship and artistry comes with practice. It's not something that you were born or gifted with. It is something that everybody can actually actively pursue. And I think that's something that we really kind of take for granted. And that's why it's important to actually understand creativity is not something that is only for special people. Creativity is actually available to everybody, and creativity is a really positive force in your life. So let's think about this. Just what is creativity? So if we define creativity, it's the act of turning new and imaginative ideas into reality. It's characterized by the ability to perceive the world in new ways, to find hidden patterns, and to make connections between those seemingly unrelated phenomena, and to generate then some novel or unusual solutions. So that's like the dictionary kind of way that we define it. Now, creativity, quite interestingly, it involves both reasoning and thinking. So there are two aspects of the brain that work when we're talking about creativity. And the first one, if we think about the idea of reasoning, creativity involves that has an output as a result of an input. So the first thing that we know about creativity is the reasoning that we're looking at here is abductive reasoning. Big word, but it's a really easy concept. Basically, abductive is about making connections even though you don't have all the answers, right? So it's about making things kind of make sense where they wouldn't naturally flow together, whether it's, putting ketchup in your chili for the first time because you don't have any tomato sauce, or whatever, but it's kind of just bringing in these things, these disparate things, and pulling them together. Now, fans of Sherlock Holmes will recognize the idea of deductive reasoning. So this is where it's all about logic and rule-based reasoning, where A equals B and therefore C, and that's the way it goes. So if you think about abductive, that's the dreaming side of the reasoning. And the deductive side of the reasoning is that planning, because once again, creativity is about taking stuff in and pushing things out. So it's that input and output. And both of these things are actually quite important for our long-term survival as humans, because quite interestingly, in case you haven't noticed, life can be kind of complex at times. And one of the things that nature has done is they have wired all of us to have this creative aspect to our personalities that maybe we haven't had to flourish yet, but it's there because it actually helps in our ultimate survival. We survive problems that could adversely affect our survival all the time. We build, we discover, we experiment. All of that comes from creativity. And if creativity was only the bailiwick of a small group of people, the world would not be as successful as it is today. So that creativity has actually been scattered throughout the entire human population to get us to move forward. Because whether we really realize it or not, just living actually requires creativity on a daily basis. So we've been doing this now for a few minutes, but I want to actually start getting some activities going on here. So let's start with our first one. So one of the ways that researchers actually measure creativity is back in 1967, they developed a test called the alternate uses test. And what it does, is it gives you an object, a common everyday object, and they ask you to come up with how many things you can do with this everyday common object. So if you've got a paper and pencil to hand or a pen or something that you can scribble on, this would be a really good time to grab that piece. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture of an object on a screen. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to come up with as many things that you can use this common object for. And then we'll go through the 4 things that actually define what that alternative uses test is looking for. So if everybody's ready, here we go.
Ready.
2 minutes, we're counting. Let's go. Boom. See, I bet you thought it was going to be something weird. No. The sound of silence.
I know, I'm not used to it.
Now, there's no rules here. Just put down whatever you think, right? Get as many things down on paper as you can. We've got about another 60 seconds. All right. Okay. So let's see what we came up with here, right? So the first thing is, how many people had more than, let's say, 5 uses for our object? Go ahead and indicate by putting your hand up on your system. Yeah, might have a few there.
Yeah, I got a few.
Okay. How many had more than 10? No? Maybe 3 minutes, huh? Maybe 3 minutes would have done the 10. I have a feeling that by this evening, you guys are going to actually keep on going back to this and going, oh, wait a minute, I could do that. Or wait a minute, I can do that, right? So it's quite interesting. So the more things that you think of, that's called fluency. So that's an aspect of creativity. How many things can you actually think of? The other thing is, how many people out there had a use which they think is a little bit kind of, a little bit extreme or a little bit bizarre, right? How unusual. Does anybody have something that's a really unusual or you think is a quirky use for a pencil?
I had nose picker.
Okay, all right. Well, that's could be dangerous if you just sharpen the pencil, but hey, I'm cool. You might be using the eraser end, in which case it makes total sense, right? That's actually called
that's cool. Heather had tie your hair up.
Tie your hair up. Yes, yes. I do that sometimes too, or chopsticks also work for that as well.
Yes.
So that's called originality, right? So how unusual. Now, how many might have had a couple of things that are just all over the place? You just think, well, yeah, I started with hair, but then I went to the kitchen, but then I can use it in the garden to stake plants. Or so a couple of people might have had, things all over the place. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So that is all about that sense of, sorry, guys, I just lost my bit here. That's about that sense, once again, of that's about that sense of not fluency, but flexibility, right? So you've got fluency, a lot of things. Then you've got originality, really unique things. Then we've got flexibility, so going all over the place and using it in different places. And then the last one, some of you, especially people that I find that are in IT and are very kind of focused in software development and things like that, you might have actually come up with a use and you went into detail. You drilled right down as to exactly how that pencil could be used in the most auspicious way. That's really about that elaboration. So when you think about creativity, it isn't just one thing, it's a combination of different things that come together. Now you might be thinking, okay, Elsa, that was really fun and thank you, now I'm awake. Why is that important? Well, what we have done by doing this is we have just all increased our creativity for the day kind of thing, right? The minute you start thinking outside the box, the minute you start stretching your brain and thinking about different things, you're actually increasing your creativity. And we're going to talk about how that actually works and why our brain actually works the way that it does. So first off, let's talk about first, it's always nice to know the why from what's in it for me, right? Why is creativity important for me? Well, if we look at it from a personal point of view, creativity does some really interesting things. By allowing you to express yourself, it gives you a chance to feel better about yourself. It releases and reduces that stress and anxiety, and especially now during a pandemic or other times when you're under a lot of stress, actually kind of getting a little bit creative and playing with things is really good. It reduces your stress hormones right away, scientists have shown. It also gives you a sense of kind of a purpose, you know? So suddenly you've gone from kind of just floundering to going, wait a minute, I can make this work. I think I can make a difference. And it also promotes feelings of both accomplishment and pride. I don't know how many of you had the benefit of growing up when you came home and you'd bring home your drawings from school and mom and dad would put them up on the refrigerator. And every single time you came home and you're like, oh, look, that's me on the fridge, right? I was lucky when I was growing up, I was quite into pottery, and I went through a period of time when I was heavily into making pottery. And my older sister continually snaffled up every single thing that I created. And I was like, why are you doing this kind of thing? But now when I go to visit my sister 30, 40, 50 years on, I see the things that I made and I creative have actually a position in her house. It's up on the wall. She uses it every single day. And when I go in there, it's kind of like, ooh, I made that, right? Mm-hmm. So you get this sense of accomplishment, right? And also too, a lot of people think that you get too old to play, but the reality is you don't get too old to play. You get old because you stop playing, right? So it's really important to kind of let yourself still have a run at things, have a go at things. Don't think that this is how you always are. It's never too late to start to be creative. If you haven't actually ever taken it this far before, it's not too late now. Now, because we all actually have a view to not only our personal life, but our professional life, how can actually creativity help us professionally? Well, I think that Emma can attest to the fact that every single job application that at least I've seen, or jobs that have been advertised over the last couple of years, have been looking for people that are actually creative or innovative or looking to build or do new things, right? So the thing about creativity is it's multidisciplinary. So it doesn't make any difference whether you're an IT programmer or you're somebody working in a flower shop or somebody actually working in retail. All of these things, that creativity can actually stand you in good stead no matter where you're looking to actually land professionally. Also, too, it fosters collaboration. So if any of you have been involved in design thinking and innovation workshops and in garages and all those other kinds of things, creativity actually helps bring a team together, right? Even more so than some of the team building activities, when you actually get people together and ask them to create something that is actually a new kind of thing, that collaboration will last longer than just that intervention. In fact, researchers have found that people who have come together in a collaborative kind of innovative workshop will continue that relationship down the track. It also helps you focus, right? So lots of times when you're at work, you've got all this BAU stuff, but then you've got that big problem. By stepping back and moving into a creative headspace, it actually allows you to focus completely on that problem, which is really cool. And that's where we get innovation from. Innovation comes from inside of ourselves and working together. And also too, from a professional point of view, it promotes that thinking and that problem solving, because you might be sitting there going, oh, there's no way to do this. And then you sit in a group with a bunch of people and somebody goes, well, what about this? And what about that? And all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute, what about that? Right? Because it opens up the door to different ways of doing it. We like to think that creativity keeps you courageous because you're willing to try almost, anything, give it a go on paper, right? Nobody gets hurt if it's only on paper. And also keeps you curious. So sometimes when you talk about doing things differently, you have to do maybe a little bit more research to figure out how you can pull that together. So it builds that curiosity. So it's a really powerful tool to use.
Surely it increases engagement.
certainly increases engagement. And, you know, when you see people create things in a lot of these workshops, you'll look at them completely differently from there forward, because it's like all of a sudden you go, hey, wait a minute, that was really clever. That was really cool. I never saw them as that. I saw them as maybe a 1 or a 2-dimensional person, but suddenly with creativity, you got 3 dimensions, and that really fosters that connection with people.
Yeah.
Now, let's look under the hood, because here's where we really get into the stuff that I find absolutely fascinating. So neuroscience is really just at the beginning of understanding how creativity works. But so far, what they have done is they have isolated the big 3 different areas of the brain that are actually involved in the creative process. And the first one is the default network. So the default network, it kind of activates and glows, you know, in your MRI type of thing when people are involved in spontaneous thinking, mind wandering, daydreaming, imagining. So it's where the idea generation happens in the brain. The next thing that we know is that there's an executive control network. So the executive control network activates when people need to focus. So you take that big picture and you drive down to that smaller picture, right? That's the idea evaluator. So at some point, the person who is using the pencil to, let's say, clean out their nasal passages, at some point, your executive control network said, is that workable?
Not a good idea.
And it might have said, yeah, as long as you use the eraser end. Okay, good, let's go back, right? So that's where that happens. And then finally, across the whole top of things, we have what's called the salience network. So the salience network is areas of the brain that activate, that kind of act as the traffic cop. So your brain thinks of something, you generate something, and then you evaluate something, you generate, you evaluate. The salience network is kind of deciding when to change channels, right? So it actually acts as the I guess, the idea promoter. So it says, hey, this is a really good idea. Let's go ahead and keep on going on this. So it really kind of acts as that thrusting forward. Now, that's at least the current hypothesis, understanding that neuroscience is new to understanding creativity. And it's really kind of, there's limits to testing because it's really hard to get a potter's wheel inside of an MRI machine, right? Or if you're a software app developer and you take your laptop in the MRI, you know, it kind of blows up. So they're working on what they have, and what they have is basically understanding that our brain, when we look at things like creativity, it's a complex adaptive system. So we don't have all the hardcore answers. We can't point to a single point in your brain that says, yes, that's where it means that you'll be good at colors, right? That hasn't happened yet, but we can actually see how it does come together. Now, as they've been investigating that, though, they do have those 3 facts that we want to take away. And these are solid things that we definitely know. And the first is that science has again confirmed there is no direct correlation between intelligence and creativity. The second thing that they've come up with is the way that the different areas connect with each other plays an important role by actually determining the number of connections we have in neural pathways, right? So it's the number of connections between these different areas that actually fosters connectivity. And then the good news is that thanks to neuroplasticity, we are able to build new neural pathways until the day we die, right? So if you want to, you know, that thing about teaching an old dog new tricks, well, that's baloney. Because our brains keep on growing, our brains keep on laying down new neural pathways. And the more we actually build up our neural pathways and use our brain's plasticity, the more that creativity and other things come to flow. We know that people that are really effective communicators, you know, both sides of the brain have a lot of traffic going between both sides of it. That's evidence of the fact that they've built a lot of these neural pathways, right?
Love that.
So
yeah.
Here's the other thing that I found really interesting, and you might be going, oh, Elsa, this is just kind of like your thing and you're into it. But here's the thing. They did a study, and it was in Denmark, and they took people through an 8-week intensive creative training program. Now, you might think 8 weeks, that's a lot of Play-Doh, right? But the reality is that out of those 8 weeks, they spent almost 6 weeks of that understanding how the brain works. And you might be going, but creativity is about making things, and why do I need to kind of dwell on that? Well, they have the idea that a lot of our creativity is hampered by our unconscious bias belief that if we aren't intelligent, if we weren't born gifted, we will never be able to draw, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. So by taking these people through this intensive and talking about how the brain works, when they tested them with the usage test that we've already done and a couple of other tests that they used to kind of earmark creativity, they found that those people were 28% more creative. And when they asked them why, a lot of these people said, well, I didn't realize that I could be, but now that I can be, now I am. So just knowing that this is not about intelligence, this is something that you can actually own, it's something that you can develop, gave them the ability to use it, because you can't use up creativity. And the more you use it, the more you have, which is why it's really important to understand what's under the hood, which I think is really, really cool. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, we talked about reasoning. Also involved in creativity is there are two types of thinking. The first one is divergent. So I like to make this akin to a radio telescope, right? So a radio telescope looks out into the cosmos and picks up every single thing that it can. Hence, it's a big dish. It's taking in a lot of stuff. The opposite of this kind of thinking is convergent thinking. So here what we're looking at is that microscope kind of thing. So following the divergent thinking, ideas and information are organized and structured, and we get granular. And that's where we get into that convergent thinking, which then follows a particular set of logical steps to arrive at a solution, right? What's really kind of interesting here is that research, when they look at how people reason and how they think, research have noticed that the self-identified creative people, people that go, yeah, I am a little bit, I am a creative, right? What they do is they tend to reconceptualize the problems more often than not. So some of you might be the kind of person that you come up with a solution and boom, that's it, and you go to it, right? And that's good in a lot of cases. But when you're trying to actually expand that creativity, what they find is that creative people will think about something, bring it all together and go, so I'm going to point my radio telescope at Mars. I'm going to see what I get, right? And I'm going to take that stuff back in and, oh, that's really cool. But maybe what I really need to do is I really need to point my telescope at Alpha Centauri and see what they're going to say, right? And catch that too. So it's taking a problem and looking at it from different ways. Now, some of you might have heard of Edward de Bono, one of my favorite kind of thinkers when it comes to how we actually can develop ourselves. And he wrote all about the 6 hats, which is lateral thinking and putting yourself in a different color hat to think about things differently. What he did is he developed a way for us to be divergent. Yeah. So look at things from different perspectives, bring those things down together, and then you use that convergent thinking to go ahead and drive output. So I think that's really kind of a cool way to think about the thinking aspect of creativity. So
sorry,
yes.
Just to go on that, looking at things from different perspectives, how do you get, say if you were doing this with your team to foster creativity, how do you get them to put their biases aside?
I think that, when he talks about using the different hat, and it's letting people say it doesn't, when we're in the radio telescope, we're bringing in all the things, there are no real rules, right? Okay, cool. Put everything down, right? Capture everything, no matter how ludicrous it might seem, capture everything. I saw an invention the other day that I thought was amazing. In order to cure hiccups, we all have ways that we cure hiccups, but somebody actually thought about it and they created a thing that's shaped like a straw that takes in both air and water, but it makes you suck really, really hard on the straw, which then mimics what's going on with your hiccups and reduces your hiccups. Right? Now, if somebody would have been doing that in a class and somebody were going, oh yeah, no, just, get a straw and suck on it. People are going, that's not really bright. But here they had this idea, they let it run out, right? They applied some stuff to it. And now we've got a new invention that is guaranteed. This thing has a 99% effective rate in curing hiccups. Who knew? Who knew, right? So if we think about what we want to do in order to foster this creativity, there's 3 approaches that I want you guys to think about. And the first one is fostering that creativity. So if you can imagine all your experience as individual moons circulating a planet, what I want you to do is I want you to go stellar. I want you to go out beyond the Oort cloud and bring in a lot of different things in order to foster that creativity. The more stuff you have, the more connecting points, the more neural pathways that you get to build in your brain, because you've got a lot more to work with, right? It's just like your spice rack. Imagine cooking if all you had was salt and pepper and oregano, right? How are you going to do a curry, right? You got to have the other stuff in there, right? So that you can get creative. And sometimes when you're looking to make those leftovers into something, you know, the first thing you do is you look and see, well, what do I have to hand? What's in my spice rack? Creativity works the same way. So what are some things that we can do to really kind of foster this creativity? Well, here's something really simple that everybody can do. Brush your teeth with the other hand, right? Now you might be going, really? Yes. Something as simple as, or catch a ball with the different hand, or start walking on a different foot. The minute that you break a concerted pattern in your brain, you're creating a new neural pathway. It's not hard to do. I would not do this when you're actually in your work clothes already, because this will cause a dribble effect oftentimes when you brush with the other hand. So, you know, do it, you know, respectfully in the right place. Also, too, another great thing, and we've been really lucky here during the pandemic, we are still encouraged to go out, and green bathing is a great way to reduce your stress and exercise. But the other thing that we know is that creativity is spurred on by nature for three reasons. One, there are inevitable patterns that we see repeated in nature. And when we go out in nature and we pick up these patterns, we suddenly see how things actually sit together. You know, whether it's the Fibonacci number, and that's why spiral shells are shaped the way that they are, but spending time in nature, also the colors that we experience in nature are good for our creativity, as well as our sense of smell. So it really activates our senses to be out in nature. So if you can, get out there, and that will actually help that creativity. Also, too, many of us have a life that is completely regimented, and we just do not factor in time for daydreaming. But daydreaming, similar to meditation, is a really good way to kind of let go of the boundaries in your brain, whether it's looking at clouds, whether it's staring at water or listening to water. You know, that's another way to kind of foster that creativity. So just get out there and just kind of don't plan on anything, and just take it all in and see how it goes, right? Have fun with it, play with it. And then finally, very much to the effect of putting more things in your bucket, don't stay on your hard and fast path of everythingness, right? Try new foods, right? Try going to see new movies. You know, if you're always the kind of person that, you know, is basically like me, I'm heavily into documentaries, right? I really enjoy documentaries, but every now and then I force myself to watch grown-up adult drama films, right? It's not something that's my natural go-to, but I go ahead and I do it, because otherwise I'm not putting new things into the mix. And the more new things you put into the mix, again, the more places that your brain can bounce off of, the more neural pathways that are out there. Because creativity involves breaking out of expected patterns in order to look at things in a different way. But you can't do that unless you've got new things to look at. So that's one of the ways that we can do it.
That's really cool. Thanks, Elsa. I think that, you know, all of this, it's like, I was really looking forward to this session anyway, but I think in terms of timing and where we're at with the pandemic and everything that's going on personally and professionally, this is a great circuit breaker. Yeah.
And none of these things cost money. Most of these things can be done within the square footprint that we're allowed to move these days, right? So all of these things are something that you can do. And I know that a lot of us, you know, went into binge watching our favorite films and things like that, and just to kind of get past it. What I would recommend is binge watch something that you never would have bothered to watch before, and really kind of experience something completely new, right?
Yeah.
Take this as a good opportunity to really experiment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we know, though, also with creativity, is that creativity sometimes works really well with boundaries. And you might be thinking, why? Well, sometimes less is more, and the very amount of building blocks can actually spur on creativity. So two examples of constrained creativity that I want to share with you is, first, there's an old story in which an author, in this case, it was actually Ernest Hemingway, made a bet with his friends that he could write a whole story using just 6 words. You want to hear what the story was? Everybody ready? Okay. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. All of you have a story, don't you? You didn't have to go into detail. You knew what it was. You could feel it. That tells a story in just those 6 words. Another one, I'm a big fan of Dr. Seuss. Sam I Am, Green Eggs and Ham, one of my all-time favorites, used only 50 words. The entire story, 50 words, right? So we're going to do a different creativity exercise this time. Once again, there is going to be a time constraint because we are living under a time constraint. But what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to all write a haiku. Now, for those of you who don't know what a haiku is, it's a Japanese type of poem, and it involves basically 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. That's all there is to it. So what does a haiku look like? Well, here's one that I actually wrote during the bushfires not too long ago. The air is now clear. Ashes of life blown on wind till fire comes again. That's it, 575. So let's take a quick minute and see what you can get down.
I did it.
Cool. Do you want to share yours with us?
Sure. We are stuck inside. Tomorrow is a new dawn. Hope is in the wind.
Awesome. That's really good.
That's fun.
Really cool. Yeah. And it's something that you can just kind of, pause and reflect. It doesn't have to be super profound. It can be silly. It can be fun. But once again, how many of you thought this morning, hey, you know what? I'm going to write a haiku today. Probably didn't occur to you, right? Once again, we're looking at what we can actually do, simple things, easy things to really start to unleash that creativity. And haikus, I find, to Emma's point, are very, very personal, and they really do kind of mirror how you are feeling emotionally and situationally, right? And it's really good to look back on it, because when I look back on the fires and how horrendous it was, and I read this and I go, that was people's life getting blown away, right? Until it happens again. So it's that really kind of ability to put yourself in a moment and use those boundaries and use those constrictions, because creativity isn't necessarily messy and all over the place. Sometimes creativity can actually be better structured and better realized by actually having some boundaries around it. Yeah. The next thing that we can do is build creative moments. So creativity is almost a behavior change, and it's a behavior choice. So by building some regular opportunities to release your creativity, it will actually get you to that point where you can start doing something, or you feel that momentum building. So things like practice active listening. Now you might go, well, why is practice active listening going to help me build my creativity? Well, it's that 6 hats, right? Except instead of you in your own head putting on a different hat, by practicing active listening, you're actually listening to somebody else who's already wearing a hat. You might not even know what hat it is that they have on. But by taking the time to listen to their perspective and understanding things, especially when we're working in a collaborative way in a work situation where we want to actually do innovation, active listening is really, really critical to understand those different perspectives. Also, another thing that we've been seeing, and I know this is quite positive, I've got a friend who's an executive GM who is all about the walk and talk. Now, why is walking and talking a creative moment? Well, one, you're usually normally out in nature. You might be walking around a shopping center doing laps, I don't know. But once again, you're moving, you're creating that exercise. That exercise is releasing hormones. Those are generally those endorphins or feel-good hormones. Once again, you're talking, you're putting things in the mix. There's a certain amount of activity. That's a great way to go ahead and start those creative juices going. Also, too, if you've known me for more than 15 minutes, you'll know that multitasking, I think, is the scourge of modern society. First off, it's impossible to multitask. Your brains are not made to do it. And the more clutter and the more kind of stuff we put in our brains and the more we try to do so many things, we never have any sense of clarity. We never actually step back from things and look at things and allow things to come into our brain because we're still trying to juggle too much. So anytime you can, walk away from that multitasking because it doesn't do your brain any good. You're increasing your cortisol. Your brain's not happy. Just slow down one thing at a time, and that will really help. And finally, taking notes. Now, you might think, oh, really, I'm not in school anymore. Really, I got to take notes to be creative. But how many times do you see something and you go, oh, wow. And then you get home and you're like, oh, what was that? Right? So to the taking notes, I would get a little bit kind of modern and a little bit kind of, bullshit here and say, take pictures, right? Use your camera, right? Use your mobile phone. Instead of taking a selfie, take a picture of something that makes you go, wow, or something that causes awe, and then bring it back home. And when you've got time, reflect on that image and go, what is it about that image that really resonated with me? What can I take out of this? I find oftentimes people that are looking to decorate their house for the first time are really big on picking the color swatches. And one of the great ways to do that is actually you go out and you're in a place where you can actually put colors together, whether it's articles of clothing or bits of nature or things. Take a picture, see how it looks, right? Take notes. What is it that spurred you on, Because once again, we've got a lot going on. And if we don't ever take a time to pause and reflect, we can never coalesce the things that we've taken on board. Because the world always seems brighter when you've just made something that wasn't there. Yeah. That's how it actually gets cool. So build those creative moments while you can. Now, here's an example of a Sydney art director who's stuck in quarantine at the Ridges Hotel in Queensland, decided that instead of bouncing off the walls and banging his head against it, he would get a little bit creative. And he would actually work out his stress and frustration of not being able to get out and see his mom, which is why he went there to begin with doing fun things. So he took all of the containers that he had that were coming in for food and actually started building different things. Now you might think, well, this is really great, but here's the thing. This guy actually improved the morale, not only of his mom, who he would send the pictures to because she couldn't see him and she was waiting to be with him, but it also improved the morale of the people working at the hotel. He's gotten hundreds of messages from all over the world because he knew that really, when you're given lemons, make some lemonade, do something different. Use that creative moment when you might be stuck and start having a play and see what you can come up with. I think this is a great example. And yes, he is an art director, so he knew how to sticky tape things and shape things. But other than that, anybody can be as creative with this kind of thing, looking what you have to hand and accepting those boundaries to actually get that creativity going. Now, the last thing that we need to do is we need to foster creative space. Now, I know that this is really a challenge for a lot of people. Some of us don't even have formal dining rooms anymore. I've seen people that have set up their home offices in their closets and things like that because, it's all about that kind of, there is no physical space. But creative space, when we're talking about creative space, it's really almost a headspace kind of thing, not always necessarily a physical thing. It could be a desk, obviously, in the corner of your room. It could be a garden bench. Some people, they start their creativity when they're in the shower. The showers are often a great place where people suddenly get aha moments or they think things through. Obviously, let's hope that, you're conserving water and we don't want you to stay in there for 4 days. But, your creative space is basically where you want it to be, where in my case, because even though we don't have, we aren't totally confined, we are somewhat confined. And my creative space is a box underneath my bed. Actually, I've got a couple of boxes because I do a couple of different creative things. But for me, the minute I slide that box off and I take off the lid, I am suddenly in my creative space. And research has shown is that by actually considering certain elements around you when you're thinking about creating or fostering this creative space can have a big difference. And it's things like the music that you're playing, right? So it could be that the music that you play, what you might want to work out to might not be the same thing that you want to use when you're thinking about being creative, right? So think about introducing new music. Setting the mood, whether it's by, for me, I can't be creative until I have cleaned, right? I need a clean kind of tableau so that when I open up my box and I create a mess, all the mess I see around me is the mess of the result of my creative expansion, not because I failed to put away last night's dishes, right? So for me, setting the mood is cleaning. But other people I've talked to, you know, they burn incense. They might light candles. You know, they might turn off their phone, right? And put it on silent so they don't get interrupted. Now, having creative fidgets close to hand is quite interesting. And I don't know how many of you have seen the movie A Few Good Men, but if you think about Tom Cruise's character there, and he's trying to work out what he needs to do, he goes looking for his baseball bat. Because when he swings and he plays and he holds his baseball bat, that spurs on his thinking. He's also, in the movie, they use the Nerf basketball as another way of actually getting that creative juices flowing. I don't know how many of you, but I grew up and I collect those little treasures, you know, whether it's the seashell from the first time I actually went to the ocean, or a rock or a pebble that really made, you know, that I like the way that it feels and the tactile nature of it. Yeah. Having those things and touching those things, once again, that sensory input, right, helps that creative space bloom. So just having those creative fidgets close to hand and having to play with them. And then finally, using a visual board, and whether that's online, whether it's a notebook, things like that. Oftentimes you'll be in the middle of a creative flow, and sometimes, you know, life happens. You got to go pick up the kids, you got to start dinner, you got to do this, you got to do that. Jot down and make a note of where you were or where you wanted to go so that you can come back to it, right? Because what happens is, if you don't actually give yourself a thread to pick up, you'll almost have stage anxiety getting back into your creative space. So leave yourself a thread, you know, that you can find your way back into that creative space so you can trigger where you were, right? That, I think, is a really cool thing to kind of think about. So when we think about pandemics and we think about times of stress and we think about, you know, I've got to have the right space, I've got to have this, I've got to have that, what you see in front of you are examples of what's known as trench art. Now, there is evidence of trench art being created going back to the Napoleonic Wars. And it was created not only by the soldiers, but the support people, so doctors, you know, ambulance drivers, things like that, all kind of took what they had to hand and started doing something with it. Now, when we talk about trench art, the reality is that some of this stuff was actually carved in the trenches during World War II. They have examples of what came out of the Dordogne and places like that, and it's simply amazing. Obviously, what they've used to create this trench art is what's to hand. But what's been interesting is when doctors actually worked with people that had been suffering from acute trauma as a result of battlefield stress, so PTSD, they found that people that actually took the time in the midst of the chaos to be creative actually had a better resolve after the chaos, as opposed to people that clamped down and held everything in. And what they did to actually help those people overcome that PTSD and that trauma or shell shock or whatever it is, they actually engaged them in art therapy. So art therapy is a really good way to kind of push past that trauma that you're holding inside. But what I want to flag to people is that here's a concept: don't wait until afterwards, right? You might be in the middle now and things might be going bad, but that doesn't mean that you need to push all that creativity aside and just go into absolute survival mode. Give yourself a sense to kind of take a break, have a bit of a play, work with what you've got, because it can actually affect your long-term results of once we get past this glitch that we're going through, right? So kind of a neat thing to do. So, you know, whether it's paper, clay, wool, whatever it is, don't wait. Don't wait, do it now. Enjoy your moment of creativity now. Because even in the most difficult situations, there's always somehow a way to triumph. And I want to end on a really good news story. And I want to, once we get through the time factor bit, we've talked now and I've put you under some constraints about time. And we know that time can actually force our hand. We also know that aha eureka moments that we often think we are not capable of, and we see people doing it all the time. We're like, oh yeah, no, that doesn't happen to me. That doesn't happen in a flash. There is no kind of alien kind of zapping people's brains and giving them these aha moments. What's happening is their brain is constantly moving and bringing things together, and finally then it actually has its moment. But if you've set yourself up for this aha moment by fostering the space, by fostering your creativity, by letting yourself daydream, that's how it actually happens, right? It doesn't happen in a flash, it doesn't happen in an instant. And what we think kind of is people suddenly magically do this. It's, once again, it's not magic. It's understanding how the brain actually works. And on that note, research scientists will also tell us that don't sit there and force yourself. They talk about writer's block or creative block or things like that. We know that if you keep on doing something repetitiously all the time, your brain sees it as a different kind of thing. It's not a new pattern. It almost starts to become a habit that is not well thought through. So if you sit at something and you're like, I just can't really come up with this, or I don't know what I'm doing, or, I'll just plug away at it. Don't. Get up and walk away. The thing about you have to be an expert and do 120 hours, and it's all of that is basically just people wanting to sell you books. What we know is that people that are looking to, let's say, the Picassos of the world, or writers of the world, you'll find that they have a routine where they get up in the morning, they do their thing. Oftentimes, depending on their biorhythms, they spend 3 or 4 hours doing it, and then they walk away. Because once again, you have to let that stuff coalesce in your brain. You have to take that information in and not try to force it through a sieve all the time. So give yourself a little bit of time and a little bit of space to go ahead and do that. And when you need to, change the channel, right? Yeah. Nothing wrong with changing the channel. So one of the things that they talk about in business is playing the what's if game. So what if you played a game where you asked yourself, what if, what if, what if? Chengdu, which is one of my favorite silly things to actually read, is about Japanese want to come up with really, really strange ways to come up with new ways of doing things. And they're often silly, although some of these gadgets have actually gone on to win awards. So they aren't all quite as silly. And I love the thing with the butter that I'm looking at here. That's how you actually get butter on toast, is you take it through a grinder, right? But what we've also seen during the pandemic is this: pivoting, right? New Balance made shoes yesterday, making masks today. I don't know how many of you follow things on the web, but some of the places that I would go and buy clothing, all of a sudden they're making masks, right? They're making all kinds of masks. They're doing all kinds of different things because they've started to pivot and they've gone, what if, right? We go back to work. What if I can't get all my employees back into work? How am I going to run this? What if we suddenly, have people working at a location? How is that going to work, right? Creativity in a work sense allows you to start playing out scenarios, and don't wait until the scenarios happen. In a work situation, play with some scenarios while you're already there. Build that innovation before you actually need it. And the good news story that I wanted to share with you is this is Dr., and I need to get her pronunciation of her name because she's from Malawi. And my speaking of Malawi is not as good as it should be, but her name is Dr. Kayuna. She's the head of pediatrics in Malawi. When the pandemic hit, they were stuck, right? They had nothing because a lot of the second and third world countries couldn't get the PPE gear. They didn't have the gear on hand. So what they have embraced is what's called frugal design. So her team tried to figure out and did a what if we can't get the PPE gear? How do we look after our patients? Somebody came up with the idea that they went to the local market and they bought up all the raincoats. And then they came back and they altered all the raincoats and turned them into safety gear for the people that they needed to. And the cool thing was, unlike most PPE gear that had to be thrown away, they could actually sterilize this and hold on to it. Now, that isn't where it ended. There are people that took clear plastic report covers that you would get at Officeworks and turned them into face shields, right? And another great story, there was a bunch of researchers at Stanford, and they took the mechanism inside of a toy flashlight, right? And worked with that and built a simple electricity-free centrifuge that could be used to actually use the testing for the COVID-19 in areas where there was no electricity, right? So we might think that we're up against the wall and we're scrambling to deal, but sometimes when we're up against the wall in hard situations, that's when we come up with some really great ideas. And every single, if you go up and you look for Frugal Design, there are examples of people coming up with things that you never would have thought of in order to actually address this pandemic that kind of caught us pretty much off guard. So on that note, I just want to say creativity is you. You can be as creative as you want. It is all within you. Let yourself go, let yourself experiment, play, have a good time, and don't wait for the perfect day. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Let creativity kind of be part of your everyday experience. And on that, I just want to share with you guys a note that I have, if I can find it, because it's all about that. So I want to close on this quote. I am enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. That was said by Albert Einstein. Pretty clever guy, but what he knew was beyond what we thought that he knew. So on that note, guys, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, everybody. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask Elsa? A couple of people have shared.
Share your haikus.
Yeah, share your haikus.
Share your haikus or your ideas.
And here's an article from Rosario too about getting out into nature. I've just shared it in the chat box.
Excellent. Excellent.
So that's cool. Hang on. Oh, Joseph said his has too many profanities. Oh, here's another YouTube resource.
Okay.
It's in the chat box.
All right.
All right. Coolio. Well, we'll send out a recording of this as well. If anyone wants to connect with Elsa, feel free to connect with her on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And if you need that, you can always PM me or send us a note and we'll introduce you to Elsa. But thank you for joining us. I hope it was a nice circuit breaker in the middle of the week. And someone's got a question. Hang on, Elsa.
Okay, good.
And we really enjoyed having you. What's the question, Mr. Mertz? Here it comes.
Okay.
Must be a long one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, can you see that, Elsa?
I have to put my glasses back on.
I can ask you. So how do you know?
Ask me. Yeah.
How do you know when you're multitasking versus just having lots of projects on the go at once?
I think the thing with multitasking and the reason that you know that you're doing it, it's almost like nothing is ever a completed sentence, right? You will get easily distracted when you're multitasking. You will lose sight and focus when you're multitasking. And it also starts to kind of ebb away at the quality. So if you've got a lot of different things on, let's say you, and for example, let's say you have to help the kids with their schooling, you have to organize dinner, and you have to go ahead and do your own work. By actually slicing that up and devoting, once again, it doesn't have to be hours, right? Multitasking kind of happens when you're doing things all at once, but you can still go ahead and put markers where you are. So say to yourself, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to focus on helping my kids get online and do this, right? And actually focus on doing that, knowing that you can pick up your next job afterwards, right? So it's letting yourself almost have permission to focus and be in the moment rather than trying to juggle a lot of different things. Obviously, if we had you hooked up to a machine, we could see your hormone levels start going up, your cortisol and all these other kind of hormones start going up in your brain because your brain is reacting to that stress. Your brain, while it's doing a lot of cross things like that, it's not, a lot of that stuff is in the background. It's when you try to bring everything up to the foreground that you really get a conflict and you start to experience what's called cognitive dissonance. And that's really what multitasking does, is it makes it hard for us to hold on to a thought for a period of time. When kids started using doing this and watching television, doing a lot of things, everybody said, oh no, that's okay, it's okay, it's okay for their brain. But what they're finding is that once again, if you constantly fragment your attention, you never actually see things to fruition. It never comes to a conclusion. So I find that if I'm doing something and I'm suddenly distracted, or I put salt in instead of sugar, I'm definitely multitasking, right? So it's just being aware and stepping back and going, what are my priorities? What do I need to do right now? You'll also find too that you will be a lot more effective the less multitasking you do. So what might take you an hour to do because you're multitasking, when you step back from that multitasking and you focus, you're going to see a significant time decrease. So they reckon that you're going to lose about 30 to 40% of your time as a result of multitasking. So suddenly your hour chore when you aren't multitasking takes you 40 minutes. And then you got 20 minutes to go ahead and freak out about what it was you were trying to not freak out about, right?
He says, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yes, I usually use the quality decrease as the giveaway. Yeah. I heard a great quote once: multitasking is a great way of doing nothing well.
Yes, a lot of nothing well.
A lot. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much. And again, if you want to connect with Elsa, you can send me a message, or you can connect with her directly on LinkedIn and start a conversation. And if you need anything else, feel free to get in touch.